Mark, good afternoon. Nice to see you. How are you, mate?
I'm alright, matey. Not too bad. I've been made a grandfather again.
Well done. And I'm sure that all of the sterling effort that you put into this event was well worth it.
Got effing nothing to do with me.
Well, it's a little bit to do with you. You did raise your son
That is true.
and develop him into the fine young man that he is.
Like I said to his missus, I never knew you had it in you. But when I saw the babe, I said, well, now you haven't, of course. I'm alright, how are you?
Yeah, I'm okay, mate. Just ticking on, just trying to work through internet issues. It seems to be the way it works down here in the beautiful south.
Well, you'll be glad to know it's working.
We worked our way through it, did we not?
You did.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you just sat there harassing me with, what are you doing? Why are you here? What's happening? Anyway, what are we talking about, mate?
Oh, right. Well, I thought we could talk about people that influenced you in your life. Now, I say people because I'm not going to do people. I'm going to do types of people, and I'll explain that in a moment. Could you point to three types or three individuals who have had some positive, well, I'm assuming it's positive, a positive influence on you over time?
Yep, we could do that. I think I could anyway. Got three names here. They would sit within work, family, and then friend type of category. Right. They're individuals who obviously I've met and have been involved with, or have been born into the family of over all of these years now. The first person that I've got down, and we've already spoken about this particular individual in the past when we talked about the Royal Navy and all the rest of it. It would come down as an individual who type of leadership probably influenced me. An ex-divisional officer in the Royal Navy. Just the way that he dealt with me when I was a young rating on HMS Charybdis, and the way that he engaged with me and the way that he didn't bounce me when I needed bouncing probably had a significant influence on me as a young leader as I came through the armed forces and as I came into the police and all of my other work running various teams and that sort of thing. I think that the influence that he had was quite significant in terms of the way that I then led, the way that I tried to serve other people. So I think that that was quite a strong influence in my early life, looking at the type of individual he was, the type of leadership that he displayed, the way that that resonated with me, the fairness around it all, and the way that I could then replicate some of that good stuff.
Can you name him?
Sub-Lieutenant John Murphy. I believe he made rank of commander in the Royal Navy. I don't know if it's the same now, but it used to be that when you were a special duties officer, i.e. you'd come out of the ranks, that commander was as high as you'd ever get. And so he obviously did well because he was an ex-rating himself once upon a time. He was grounded well. He knew where he had come from and he knew what he had been able to achieve. And he could see potential in other people and would encourage that. As I said before, he probably wouldn't remember who I was, but that's beside the point. The impact he had on me as a very young man was significant. And the way that he developed and demonstrated his leadership was significant because that then carried over into my 40 years of service. I can remember sitting having conversations with my staff last year who were very young people, and I would relay to them conversations that I had had with him as a young man. And say, you know, I learned very early on that this is a good style. This is a good way of leadership. And it served me really well until I met people who were twats. Then it didn't serve me so well.
I just want to pick up on something that people who have not served in the military, the Navy, or even British, may not be able to comprehend. I don't know if even I can comprehend it. What possible reason could you have if you're the military, that you've come through the ranks, you're good enough, but you only get to commander because you were in the ranks? It's almost Victorian. What, do you have to be landed gentry or something to be an officer now of a higher rank? It's pathetic.
It is. As I say, I don't know if that's still the same today. You got to remember, mate, when we were in it was 40 years ago. Things have changed over 4 decades. I mean, they now send women to sea, for goodness sake. What's all that about? Ships sink when women go on it. We all know this. So I'm sure it's changed now. I'm sure that you don't have that glass ceiling put on you as was put on you back in the day. But and let's face it, it's truth. If you got to rank a commander, you are James Bond, aren't you?
Yes, that's
right. I mean, that's all you need to worry about is becoming Commander Bond, and that's it. You're good enough.
But it does bring up some memories about the class structure in the Navy and how bizarre it was. Like me and you from the lower ranks, we could be put in front of the captain on the captain's table and punished if we were drunk or discredited the ship or whatever. Never an officer. They're not capable of being drunk. They only get high-spirited.
And I can remember the old cocktail parties that the officers used to throw on the flight decks and the hijinks that they would be involved in, that if you and I had been involved in, we would have been ending up shoreside in detention quarters, in DQs somewhere.
And this person, if you have to give it a title for a thumbnail, it'd be in praise of, what, good leader?
Yeah, a very young, impressionable 16-year-old who met this officer in the Royal Navy who instilled a certain style and form of leadership that spread way beyond the 9 years I served with the Royal Navy and served me all the way through 40 years of service to the Crown. He did a good job, solid leadership, influential leadership. When your legacy lives on way beyond you, you know that you've had some sort of influence in the life of that individual. So if people are still talking about you 40 years on and saying that man that I met 40 years ago influenced my life to the extent that I then carried forward his style of leadership into my leadership model, that's good legacy, right? That's legacy leadership. And I think that's what you want. You want that sort of legacy leadership where people are still talking about you in a positive way. There will be other leaders that I have met over the years who I will talk about in a negative way. And their legacy leadership, like I say, is pants.
Not literally, for those who think we're talking about trousers. About the family, I was thinking about that because I could very easily say my mum, my dad, obvious. And I don't want to downplay them because they are the most influential. But I didn't want to put their images up onto the internet. Therefore, I thought I'd go down the type of person as influenced. Now, they may fall into these categories. When I was growing up in the 70s, I was naturally drawn to books that most people then and since aren't really interested in. And it's books from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the 16th, 17th, 18th century, probably up until the time of, say, Bertrand Russell. Most to be published had to be of a certain type. They would have been well versed in the classics, well versed in ancient Greek and Roman myth. They couldn't stop themselves writing without peppering in a few Greek phrases, Roman phrases or phrases from scripture, and they would never explain it. There was no info dumping. There was no footnote to explain it. They assumed and they knew that whoever's buying these books knew what they were talking about. I had no idea, and I thought, I want to be like that. I want to know, what's this turning swords into plowshares? Where's that from? I didn't know at the time. Who is this Antigone that they keep talking about? I've got to find out. And of course, this is in the era before the internet. It took decades for me to get up to any level of ability to say, yeah, I know what they're talking about there. I get the phrase, I get what they're talking, and I understand it now. For instance, there was one phrase that prompted me to get a book that in itself has been an influence. And the phrase was, 3 sheets to the wind. And I thought, what does this mean? And I realised, well, it means drunk. It comes from the Navy, and it meant that you're all over the place. And the only reason I knew that, because I came across Brewer's Phrase and Fable. Wonderful book. The most modern version I've seen has a real bright pink front. And they give you all these phrases and sayings that are now fallen by the wayside. You never hear them, or certainly here in New Zealand. So it's the intellectual that would write in that way that I don't come across in any form or flavour now. If they are, they tend to be niche. In fact, when I wrote my books, I don't want to put my books out there and saying that they're going to be similar. But one of the nice comments that I had on a review was that it was very erudite. I love erudite people who just, with confidence, give you all this stuff and they don't care whether you know it or not. In fact, the closest modern author I've ever come across is Patrick O'Brian with his Master and Commander. So that's my first type, because it's led me to start reading books I probably would never have read otherwise. So intellectual.
So when you were looking at picking up those books on Greece and Rome, and you'd got that interest in them, and as you said, it was all pre-internet days. So you'd have to go and do your own research. You'd have to go to the library or get reference books and do your own digging around it. Yeah. Now that's something that we have lost the art of, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Poring over reference books, poring over map books, cross-referencing this topical index to that topical index to that, to that, to that. Do you think that having to do that, by having to engage yourself in all of this reference work in order to understand what it is you're reading, that the learning has stuck better for you?
Oh, that's a good point. Yes, absolutely. If I've learned anything as a teacher of old, It's that you tend to remember only 10% of what you get in a classroom. To get it more into the student's head, you have to show them, they have to hear it, and then they have to physically do something. Write it down or go out and find something. That going out and finding something, for me, and it seems to be for most people, really fixes it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. And I was always fascinated by people who had superb memory, but it's because they were physical. They were doing stuff to make it go into their long-term memory. So you're absolutely correct. It did really make a difference. Would you say the same about you?
I would definitely say that. I think that the more that you have to actively engage not only your mind, but yourself, i.e., opening pages, rummaging through stuff, writing with pens and paper, seeing it, writing it, flicking through it, it does something to you in terms of the retention value of it. I was listening to some old teaching that I did years ago, so probably about, 6 years, 7 years ago, which I've recently put up on Spotify on one of these like time capsule episodes on this teaching. And I was listening to it because I was interested in what I had to say about this particular point. And you know what? I'm listening to myself speak and I'm thinking, blow me, I've forgotten that, because it's just a very short space of time that I was working on this particular little project for, that I had focused on it for that. I had distilled the information for that. I had stored it in like my RAM and not my hard drive, So it was all there in the front of me to get out to project at that time. But it's never really seeded itself in me to the depth that it should have done. I guess we've only got so much storage space, haven't we? But I do think that we are quite shallow in the way that we learn now. I think we're quite shallow in the way that we retain information. And we've found this, haven't we? You put up a soundbite of 2 or 3 minutes and you'll have hundreds of people look at it. You put up a discussion or a topic that you're talking about for an hour and it falls on deaf ears. It's quite strange.
Yeah. Language is back to front. For some reason in English, knowledge is a noun, but it's really a verb. It's a doing. It's not just naming something, it's a doing. The original way of educating people, they would walk, and it was called pedagogy, learning by walking. We still call it pedagogical, but you do not allow any student in a classroom to walk around now. They have to sit there passively. That's why I think half of them never remember anything.
Yeah, interesting. Intrigued.
Yes, and that's going to be a little episode on its own. I guarantee it. Who's your second?
So my second, again, bringing it into a sort of a category, would be a family member. Obviously, there are numerous members of my family who I've very high regard for, my parents included. But the person I would have picked would have been my grandmother on my mother's side, so my old nan.
And so you just know, we're not showing images of Steve's gran. These are just stock images of old ladies.
I think the reason that I would have picked her is because I had a really close relationship with her. I had a really good friendship with her outside of being my grandmother. And my grandfather, I was close to him as well. But my nan was probably a bit of a champion for me because I was always a little rogue in the family. I was never as good as my brother. And my sister, bless her, she just got on and did life and kept her head down. But I was always the one that was the bit of the rogue. I was the one that if the police were going to turn up at the door, it was probably because of me. That sort of thing.
How ironic.
Yeah, I know. Poacher turned gamekeeper. It's just the way it was. And I think my nan was always a bit of a champion for me. It was always, he'll be all right. Leave him alone. He'll be fine. And I used to just love her. I used to love her conversations. And it was through her that I got my love of hoarding everything. I reckon this is why I don't throw so much stuff away, because I think, just hang on to that, because that, I remember when that came about and where I got that.
Yes.
And that's very much from my nan. But she also instilled in me a love of my ancestry, because she would talk about her grandmother and she would talk about her mother, who died when she was like 35. And so my nan was still very, very young. And she would talk about where she came from. She'd talk about the family. She'd talk about family members, even down to stuff that's in one of the museums in London that was from my great-great-great-grandfather. And she showed me photographs. And so she instilled in me this great love of family history, of ancestry. As we've said before on one of our channels, the whakapapa, our ancestry going back in terms of the Māori language and te reo. She kept things alive for me. She kept people alive. I haven't been back for a little while, but every time I would go back, I would go to the family grave and I would clear the weeds and I would put some flowers down and all of this, because these people are still alive to me. I don't forget them. They're still around. You die twice, when you die physically and then when people stop speaking your name. And I think that that love of the past, that love of the history of the past, the stories that bring people to life in the past, that was just fantastic. And she was a woman of very deep faith, but she was not fundamental, in your face sort of faith. She didn't ram anything down your throat, but she had a very, very deep faith. And that just flowed out of her in general conversation, just general chit chat. Her faith would always come through. She would always have a wise word for things. I was so fond of her, and she made a very big impact in my life in terms of my love of the past and in terms of probably my spirituality.
In praise of grandmothers.
In praise of grandmothers, yeah. And that's detracting nothing from the high regard I hold my mother and father in. But I couldn't bring everybody into the conversation, so I thought, well, my nan's no longer with us, and it's much easier to talk about somebody who's no longer with you.
Top chefs will always say they learnt at the apron strings of their grandmothers. It's amazing the effect that they have.
You've just become a grandfather again recently, and I think that the value of a grandparent in society is completely and utterly underrated. Within the Western societies where we live now, so when you look at the Pacific Island families that we have around us, they are still very much in touch with the generational elders. They're still very much in touch with the matriarchy or the patriarchy or whichever way it is. And they still see great value in having old people around them. Whereas in Western contemporary society, old people are just in your way. Get them in a home, get them out of the way.
So I think it's an Anglo-Saxon thing.
Yeah, you're right, because Italy's not the same. Well, it wasn't when I lived in Italy, you're right. I mean, Italians, they have everybody from the eldest of the eldest to the youngest of the youngest. But certainly within the British society, and we saw that change as we were growing up. Within the British society, it's a case of get granny out, wheel her away, and get her in a home as quick as you can. And I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's a good way of dealing with people. In praise of grandparents.
Yeah, can't praise them enough, that's what I say.
That's what I reckon as well now. Now that we are both in that category, which is quite scary, to think that you and I are now grandparents. Can you imagine back in the day when we were sat down the mess drinking our tins of CSB or whatever we were drinking? We'd be having a conversation going, you know what, Steve, mate, when I'm a granddad, this is where I'm going to be, and I'll be going, mate, you're never going to make it to being a granddad. Look at the state of you.
Yeah, well, thanks. How many grandchildren you got now?
9.
Good God. You know, it's strange. When we was growing up in the 80s, the thought of being a saga holidaymaker in their 50s was, no, that's never going to happen. It comes quickly. If you're listening, youngsters, it comes quickly. So my second one, it's in praise of people who are spiritual. I got into this, again, through reading old books. And I was drawn, naturally, to philosophy, the pre-Socratics, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all the way through to Nietzsche and Bertrand Russell. Whatever your perspective is and however people paint you and what they think you are, when you go beyond the 3D, the third dimension, into the fifth dimension and beyond the metaphysical, they're the ones who have influenced me. Because I'm fascinated by what we think we are and what lies beyond what we know, or see, perceive. This would be philosophy, faith, it would be all religions, I am omnist, all and none. It would be every path that leads up to the summit of why we're here and what happens when we cross the veil, cross the bar, as I said in the Navy. So I'll accept Reiki, tarot, philosophy, or the prophets, anything that is about the human condition and beyond. I've always been influenced by that. And some of the greatest conversations I've ever had throughout my life are with people who are similar. That unfortunately are very few and far between. And this is where I'll put you down, Steve, because I remember conversations with you, passing over books to you, and you gave me a book on the Charybdis. I still remember. You've probably still got the one I gave you. The comments that in unguarded moments they'll probably say, not realise what they've said, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, that's right, I never thought about that. You have to be malleable, you have to be able to change what you think. There's no right and wrong answers, it's just disagreement. But more unites us than divides us. So I've been influenced by these people, and I think it's one of the greatest influences on me.
Yeah, and those are the life questions that everybody at some point will ask, because the reality of the world is we all go. Where do we go? Where do we end up? What happens afterwards? And obviously there are some people who say, well, that's it. We're just a bunch of random atoms all smashed together, and once we're gone. There's nothing more. Maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I just don't see that in myself, because there's just something more. I think Keanu Reeves was interviewed a little while ago, and he was asked, what do you think happens once you die? And he said something like, if I remembered this correctly, we leave a lot of sadness for those who love us. And I thought to myself, that's a very interesting answer, because you haven't actually answered what happens to you after you die. And I would absolutely agree with him. I think that you do leave a lot of sadness for those who have loved you. But what happens to the thing that makes you who you are? Because the thing that makes you who you are is not the body that you are contained within. There is something that goes beyond that physicality. As you know, I have a spiritual belief, but my spiritual belief may not be the way that some people would want it to be, because I'm not big on institution. I'm not an institutionalized believer. What I've sensed and what I've seen over the years, and rational thinking and all sorts of stuff like that, because we obviously live in this three-dimensional world that we live in, or four-dimensional space-time, etc. There is a part of me that thinks that what the ancients have called spirituality is actually nothing more than what physics and science would describe as dimensionality. So there are dimensions beyond the dimensions that we live in, and the ancients couldn't describe those dimensions in a scientific way, so they called it spirituality. And I think that that's what spirituality is. It's a dimensionality. So we will one day be able to move out of this dimension into other dimensions, which is the spiritual world. I just think they're one and the same thing, which explains a lot of things to me as I read various books, scriptures and things like that, how things work and how things operate. It's as if there's a concentric series of circles, and we are right in the center of this circle, and then all of these other concentric circles flow out from us, and those are the different dimensions. And when we finish in this center, we have the ability to move out and go beyond. And that's spirituality, that's dimensionality.
There are people who won't believe in any of what we've said. That's their choice. I don't really want to make any effort to try and convince them otherwise, except I would say this. When you're in your 80s and 90s and you're on your deathbed and your compos mentis and you're about to die, you won't be thinking, if only I spent one more hour being a dickhead or one more hour being at work. You'll be asking, was I a good, in our case, son, husband, father, grandfather? Because that's what matters. And interesting when you have conversations with people who don't believe in any of the spirit or beyond. I say to them, well, you won't be thinking that when you go to hospital and you're asking for help. Where do you think the hospitals come from? What caused people to want to make a building and stock it with people whose sole job is looking after other people and not themselves? You'll want it then, and you'll realise we're more than a body, because you will want to survive for some reason. And it won't be just gloating over how much money you've got. It'll be other things. It'll be love, hope and charity. None of that is found in science. So whether you are against spiritual or religion, that's your choice. But it's always that famous saying, isn't it? In the First World War in the trenches, there were no atheists.
When the chips are down, mate, the chips are down, aren't they? I do understand your point around praise of the spiritual. I think that there's a whole round of people that you could sort of fit into that bucket who would have significant influence on your life and your way of thinking. And, you know, look, going back to yourself, when I was a young fella in the Royal Navy with you, being able to have conversations with you that I couldn't have with certain other people. And again, it just sort of opens my thinking. It opened my thinking to different ways of looking at things. And I think that's really, really, really healthy. One of the things that bothers me at the moment in this era that we're living is that people are not being encouraged enough to actually ask questions of each other and to be able to sit and dialogue with each other and to be able to disagree with each other. You can disagree without being disagreeable, and you should be able to do that. This is a grown-up way of behaving. The pathetic way of dealing with things is to close things down and to say, I'm not talking to you about that. I'm not talking to you about that. I refuse to mention that. And people that do that do it from a position of piousness and of virtue, as if I can't possibly talk about that. Our blessed Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she did this with the Christchurch incident and refused to name the guy that perpetrated all of these crimes and this massacre. I understand why she wouldn't want to give him airtime. I get that, totally get that. But to make him like Voldemort, he who shall not be named, is nonsense. You should know who this person is, because you should know how you can identify people like this. What sort of person, what was he called, and why was he called it? Don't make people out there just because it sounds noble and it sounds virtuous and it sounds pious. That's just my view around that.
But you are right. We've got to a point now where people are being encouraged to do two things. To remain childlike. And of course, children tend not to process arguments as effectively as, say, a full-grown adult. Not all full-grown adults. When we left school, we were 15, 16. Now they have to stay till 18. So all we're doing is deferring adulthood after they have already started voting. And then we distract them. Little distractions that will keep you childish. Stupid falling over videos, minute long. People generally aren't encouraged to think. But the question that I've always had, and we've raised it a number of times, who benefits from that? Who's the people that encourages that kind of behaviour? Anyway, that's a different topic. Steve, who are you praising in your third one?
Aside from yourself, Mark, I would put this down as various friends and mates who I've come across over the years who have just been good people who have left something positive in my life, and hopefully I've left something reasonably positive in theirs, and who have walked alongside me at good times and bad times. One particular individual in mind who I had a good close friendship with over many years, Dave Gemmell, author of Heroic Fantasy, and he and I were good mates for a good number of years before he passed away back in 2006. This was probably because he was somebody who I would be able to meet up with and we could have good conversations with. And he was a good few years older than me, so he'd got a lot more life experience than me in certain areas. I didn't always agree with everything he said, far from it, and I don't think he got everything right, far from it. But I used to enjoy his company. I used to enjoy the debate. I used to enjoy the wit. I used to enjoy the cut and thrust of discussion and saying, well, I don't agree with you, mate. And he would say, well, you should agree with me because I'm older and wiser than you. And I go, no, you're being stupid and you're just being an old fart type of thing, you know. So there's a really good relationship with each other where we could just have these conversations. His wife thought that we would just get together and drink vodka and it would just be hail fellow, well met, backslappy, bonhomie type of thing. And then when she sat in on one of our conversations, she's like, gosh, you two don't agree on anything, do you? I said, no, it's great. We had such a difference in worldview to so many things. But it was the friendship. This is what being grown-up's about, that you can develop good friendships with people who are very different to you, who hold very differing views to you, but you can still have a great deal of love and respect for them as an individual, although you sit on different sides of the fence to lots of different things. And I think that's a really valid and useful thing to have in your life. And again, I think it's been really helpful for me personally as I've walked my life, because it means that I'm pretty comfortable with most people. Because I think to myself, I may not agree with you, but I'm fascinated as to why you think it, and I'm really interested as to why you hold that view, and I wonder what there is that you think about other things that would benefit me knowing, and I could build into my worldview. We're so much better off when we've got lots and lots of different things going on, right? With lots and lots of different people around us and lots of different flavours.
There's this book, I've mentioned it before, it's the Anam Chara. The writer is John O'Donoghue. Gaelic thought, and the belief that your best friend is your soul. And then if you can have a soul friend in another body, it's fantastic. And it does occasionally happen. Some people meet 3 or 4 in their lifetime. Some people just meet 1. You know it's a true friend if you can disagree with each other and don't get upset. The problem today is we don't encourage people to hear a viewpoint that's not their own. They go into echo chambers and they're just reinforcing their own beliefs. Or they get into a clique of people and it's just constantly reinforcing what they believe is the worldview and shun those that are not similar. And of course, you'll know, being a detective, incels and all that, you very easily go down the dark side. So you need somebody who could not judge you, not think you're a dickhead, but will say, no, I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. Because that is healthy. That's half the problem with some politicians. They surround themselves with yes men and women. They never get told, no, that would be a wrong idea. And it's not just politicians, it's anyone in the public realm who believe that suddenly they're important and their view is the only view. You need somebody who is prepared to say, no, I don't think that's right. And then will say to you why they think that's right. Or will say to you, yeah, you are correct. So valuable. And I'm pleased for anyone, including yourself, Steve, that you've found someone that you can feel that is the case.
Well, it's not replicated across society, is it? We've seen that over recent years, where the level of censorship on people's ability to be able to hold a differing view from the narrative is so starkly controlled. Go back to Jacinda Ardern, who I really liked. I find her actions quite troubling because I had a lot of respect for her. But when she stood there and said, we are the sole source of truth, do not believe anything unless we tell you. I mean, as soon as you hear that from a political leader, that they are the sole source of truth, the single source of truth, you have got to have alarm bells going in your head, because that's just not the case. There are always differing points of view. There are always differing opinions. And there is always value in listening to differing points of view and differing opinions, because it helps you build a richness into your life. And I think that that's really important. There we go. In praise of good mates. And thankfully, we have had a few over the years.
My final one. In praise of the artistic types. Anybody who likes art history, sculpture, words, singing, painting, anything that expresses the human soul in a form that other people can see, and you could leave as a legacy, as a reminder after you've long gone of what you thought of the world, how you saw the world. Now, saying that, my degree, my major was art and design. I literally went in thinking I want to so love modern art, but oh dear, some of it I can't stomach. And there's a kind of effect that happens in art where there's a lot of bandwagonism. So 10 years ago, every art looked like Adobe Photoshop had been done, you could tell, and so on. And that's fine, that's great. And of course, we had great back and forth with AI-generated images, didn't we? It's great fun. It's making sure that everything you do is to be respectful, it's not to be negative, it's to give perhaps a different slant on life. Colourful, vibrant, happy, makes you feel good. Just to put out there, my favourite type of art is Fauvism, which is Fauvism. It's very colourful art, very popular in the 1910s. But anything that says, this is how I see the world, this is my depiction of it, what do you think? Imagine a world with no art, no expression. It'd be boring. So it's in praise of anyone who has ever tried art, however brilliant, however, well, some people would say is not very good. I don't believe that at all. I think a child's painting is as beautiful as any Rembrandt, and so on. And it's from prehistory all the way through. I mean, my mum, bless her, said, I can't draw a stick man. And I said, well, neither could Picasso, but he tried. In praise of anybody who's prepared to pick up a pen and do something with it.
The artists and the creatives over the years, the people that have been involved in sculpting things and add so much richness, don't they? They add the strands of colour into the tapestry of life. They bring something out of life that we can't all of us see. The thing with art, painters and sculptors, is that it involves time. You have got to invest time, which means that you're investing so much of self into what you're doing. Same as if you're writing a book, I would imagine. You're investing time and energy and effort into the creation of characters, into the creation of plots, into the creation of scenes, etc. So the investment of humanity is massive in those pieces of work. And I really appreciate that. And I find it quite staggering that there are so many gifted, incredible individuals who can do that sort of thing. I'm very jealous of it. I would like to be more creative myself. I'm a bit like your mum. I can't draw a stick man, and it doesn't matter how much I tried, I'd never be a Picasso. There are some people that just have this natural leaning, and when you see this come out of them, it's almost like they're channeling something that is not them.
The Greeks certainly felt that. It was the Muses. They descended.
You listen to singers, I don't know, Britain's Got Talent or one of these song shows, America's Got Talent or whatever they are, and you see somebody come on who looks a little bit frumpy and a little bit, oh my goodness, this could be a disaster. And yet as soon as they open their mouth, Paul Potts worked in a mobile phone shop or something, didn't he? And blow me, he opens his mouth and he sings and you go, where the hell did that come from, man? It's almost like you're channeling something that is way bigger than you and it needs to express itself. And I think that with the artists and the painters, whatever way that they channel, and whatever way that that expression then manifests, it's bringing something forth, it's birthing something fresh. There's such a richness to it. It's wonderful. I really appreciate it. I'm crap at it all, but I really appreciate it.
I think the perception with art is that you've got to be drawing or sculpting. Some of the greatest creators are women giving birth. And one of the, what we consider normal artists, are actually two men, Gilbert and George. And for 50, 60 years, whenever they're in public, they're always wearing suits, very well attired. They are two different men who have become one artist. Their art can be provocative. So the way you dress, the way you talk is artistic. The way that you become a kind grandfather or grandmother is just as artistic as anybody painting. You mentioned someone recently in one of our videos that if I just said one word, Hineni, you'll know exactly who I mean because it struck a chord with you. It's like poetry. Certain words, certain phrases can grab you because it stirs something within us. There's a connection there, and I think it's far beyond the physical.
Definitely. We tap into something which is way outside of our dimensionality, and it produces something amazing in the world in which we live. I have a huge love of art, perhaps a different love of art than you have. I'm not keen on modern art. I'm not keen on abstracts. I'm not keen on all of that. What I really appreciate is real fine brush strokes and intricate detail and depth with a little bit of darkness coming through. Things like I've got a couple of lovely oil paintings of an old galleon, like anchored off a Cornwall coast or somewhere like that, and smugglers' boats coming across with a full moon sort of up there in the distance. And it's very atmospheric. There's clearly some story going on, and you look at it and you can make up the story in your head as you look at the art. Dirty, great big caskets of tobacco that they're offloading and they're trying to smuggle it ashore, and you disappear into it. And I think a piece of art that can make you disappear into it is really quite impressive.
So there you go, 6 types that we would openly praise as being of great worth in our lives, influential. And full enough, the ones you said I would take on board, apart from the first one, as an individual, but a type, definitely.
Anyway, mate, we'll leave it at that, shall we?
Yeah, speak to you next week.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
Take care.